Okay, welcome to the last of the Women's Studies Brown Bag Women's History Month special presentations. And today I'm very honored to present Dr. Roksana Badruddoja. She's a faculty member in Women's Studies, soon to be departing this university in order to take a job in the private sector in New York, working with homeless people. Dr. Badruddoja's specialty is she's a sociologist with a PhD from Rutgers, and her specialty, what she's been writing about a lot recently, is, you could say, the South Asian diaspora.
Yeah.
And how is it to experience life in the US and elsewhere as someone whose ancestors, perhaps recent ancestors, come from what is called South Asia, from India, from Bangladesh, from Sri Lanka, from Pakistan. And she has 2 books, and I think are you gonna read from one of the books?
I'm gonna read from both of them.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna read from both of her books. So without further ado, Dr. Badruddoja.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to do 2 book readings today. One is from my first book called Eyes of a Storm, and this book is actually being showcased at the Smithsonian right now. They have an exhibit called The Homespun, and it's part of that project. So it's at the Smithsonian. I was recently there to give a book talk, and it was really, really exciting. My second book is called The Peppermint Generation, Not, and that's in press. I don't have a hard copy with me, but I chose some things that I wanted to read for you from the manuscript. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Eyes of a Storm. So on an unusually warm weekday afternoon, sometime in November 2004, Rupa, one of the women involved in my field work, shares with me, I was born here, meaning the United States, but there's a part of me that feels like I do not belong here. I currently embody everything that the majority of at least eligible voters hate. And I think what she says next to me is highly poignant. She says, I'm queer, I'm Muslim, and I'm brown. What else is there? I mean, she's not even talking about double jeopardy. She's talking about triple and multiple jeopardy, right? So Rupa insightfully problematizes the monolithic and linear notions of home, which are linked to a singular spatial category, along with why she is simply not just an American, but indeed also the other. In Eyes of a Storm, my first book published in 2010, I argue that space has become recognized as a signifier of a group's status in society. For minorities, marginalized through race, ethnicity, religion, and/or sexuality, uneven development in space has compounded their sense of isolation. I begin with something which I call the Orientalist phantasmatic, and I do this by indulging in a quote from Samina Ali's Madras on Rainy Days. And in fact, I also critique Jhumpa Lahiri because she's known to be representative of the South Asian community, but I'm arguing both Samina Ali's work and Jhumpa Lahiri's work are quite problematic in understanding migration and diasporic movement of South Asians. So here's something from Madras on Rainy Days, and my argument is it represents South Asian American identity formations within an American Orientalist discourse. So Laila, the Muslim Indian American protagonist, painfully reveals on page 26. And in fact, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking she's probably talking like this, right? She's like, I had faced this all my life, the way each country, meaning US and India, held a moral stance of the other. It was as though each nation had its own uniform, and I wore the shirt of one, the trousers of the other, and both sides were shooting at me. I had never witnessed such confused and beguiled lovers. So in essence, the second generation are thought to occupy a liminal zone, one between hamburgers and chicken curry, so to speak. They are the ABCD conundrum. However, my book challenges the ABCD paradigm. So I'm certainly sympathetic to this as a theory of real ruptures in lived experience. But this theory seems to be untenable as I probe the real dispersion of cultural experiences across situations within a set of lives. So what then are some of the sites of contention within this quote? It's absolutely imperative to consider what the division between America and South Asia imply here. The central problem with Layla's words is the torn between two cultures rhetoric, right? This socially constructed East-West divide. In the America, South Asia, East-West tradition modernity discourse, Americanness is simply an unambivalent index of cultural difference, even superiority. And of course, South Asia is considered the ultimate site of failure. So let us now take a brief glimpse at what is really going on in the lives of everyday South Asian American women in the context of race, ethnicity, and religion. I return to Rupa here. Not knowing how to frame her relationship with her white American and Christian boyfriend, Rupa, a Muslim Bangladeshi American, used anti-religious discourse to talk to her parents. Over the summer when I moved in with him, I told them. I also told them that I wasn't Muslim at the time. I didn't know how else to explain it without telling them, okay, this is the person I love. What ended up happening was that I was disowned. As Rupa helped me to deconstruct her herstory, I uncovered that engaging in practices that would perhaps be considered un-Islamic was a centrifugal theme in her life. However, this is the interesting part. Rupa's words simultaneously showed me that she is nevertheless strongly connected to a Muslim identity from an ethnic perspective. So she doesn't identify as Muslim, and yet she does. So this is what she says. I remember having this discussion about the word jihad with my boyfriend, and I said, jihad doesn't mean holy war. The actual word means struggle. He said, no, it's like this really warmongering society. I said, no, that is not all it is. It was interesting because I didn't identify as Muslim, but I knew that was a part of me somehow because I really felt it was an attack on my people and me. So Rupa's words demonstrate that she is uncovering ways in which to realize her religion and ethnicity performatively and sexuality together through redefinition rather than forging one for the other. I continue to problematize the monolithic notions of both identity and home by introducing the words of one more woman from my fieldwork, Priyanka. And I really love this quote as well. It's actually funny. From the corner of my eye, I could tell he was staring at me for most of the train ride. He finally decided to say something. First, he asked me, of course, if I was Indian. He then asked me if I spoke Hindi. After all that, he asked me, so how long have you been in this country? Which was the weirdest question of all because I don't have a foreign accent. So along with Rupa, Priyanka critically outlines a tacit assumption of foreignness, a denial that the women are from here, there, and everywhere, multiple alliances and multiple homes. That's what I argue in my book, and what it means to be an American. And so essentially what I'm saying is that we have a very monolithic, unmarked, and normative understanding of what an American national self is. So the authentic South Asian American experience simply represents South Asia within tropes of Western hegemonic structures where South Asian and American are essentialized identities, never broken down into further specificity. What is being written in both the academic and popular narratives is a story of cultural displacement, which evades the specificity of gender and depends on stereotypic propositions about America and South Asia. Indeed, the cultural displacement model plays a key role in perpetuating the cultural authority of the West. Reconfiguring the boundaries of identity may seem infeasible and even unfathomable now as we come across anti-immigrant policies like Arizona's SB 1070, in which Jan Brewer's reasonable suspicion means sharing phenotypic characteristics with Dora the Explorer. So I know my child is not going to Arizona anytime soon. And public speeches delivered by politicians like Sharon Angle, who says, I don't know that all of you are Latino. Some of you look a little more Asian to me. Okay, however, I vehemently argue that it is precisely at this moment of rigidity that we can mobilize resistance. I mean, this is the time to do it. It is in this historical space that I offer to you my second book, the edited volume, The Peppermint Generation, Not, which is still in press. One of the author's contributions inspires the title of the edited volume. Desai writes, Is that what my generation has become? Swirled red and white cliches like peppermints in neatly twisted plastic wrappers, gleaming in ceramic candy dishes? Free for the taking, unwrapping, dissecting? That is not how it works. When you unwrap the mint, you don't taste the red or the white, just one clean coolness, refreshing. Desai describes her personal struggles with national belonging. Actually, she describes her personal struggles with national not belonging, forced assimilation, and multiculturalism in her poem, The Peppermint Generation. Her work begins to point out that national belonging and its relationship with multiculturalism is subject to a heavily contested debate. The reader will be further welcomed to poems and essays that speak to processes of colonization, Orientalism, hegemonic formations, and racialization, culminating in the emptying and hollowing effects on identity work. Vidya Shankar in Racism Off the Rack, Labels Belong to Clothes, Not to Shoppers, describes attending a graduation ceremony. And I really love this piece because I can't count the number of times that people have seen me in a sari and asked me if that was my costume, right? So here's what she says. The graduate I came to support wore formal attire he would have worn in his native country of Nigeria, as did his wife. Many people from many corners of the world remarked at how wonderful it was that they wore their traditional costumes. They are not costumes, my friends. They were not trying to dress up like Nigerians. So right. So it's the idea that saris are costumes, but jeans, which are quintessentially American, are not called, are you wearing your costume, right? So while Shankar's friends were not trying to dress up like Nigerians, Ranjit Sauri, in his piece, The Indian Wants the Bronx, shares the shock. The lights come up, and I was jolted by the sight of a young white actor playing the part of an Indian. Right, so this particular play that he writes about is the central character is an Indian, and in fact, Ranjit is an actor, and he tried out for the part. He didn't get it, which was fine with him, but he was tremendously shocked that there was a white man who was playing the part, and all the Hindi lines were like phonetically written out for him, and he thought that was problematic because the argument behind multiculturalism is, what is authenticity? Well, if you want authenticity, then you should realize, for example, that chai is not a drink that was made up in California, right? So Sarah Hussain, in her poem, New York City, When All Wars Come Home, reconnects me with a fearful memory of removing my 24-karat gold chain housing a small medallion with the word Allah etched into it before I entered LaGuardia Airport on a day sometime after September 11th, 2001. She writes, a Bengali photojournalist gets killed on a corner of an East New York City block. A few Latino men, as children stand their hands clutching, caught, peeking on the side of a building's shade. Ever wonder why a Pakistani woman living in Queens for almost 10 years speaks not one word of English, gives birth to her third child while her husband detained in some INS prison without money to pay her bills, no groceries, no rent, no money for his defense? And in fact, when 9/11 happened, there was a huge raid in Astoria, Jackson Heights, where Bangladeshi men were detained, right? So a 15-year-old Muslim girl gets raped by an 18-year-old Hindu boy. I love this part. Not in Gujarat, India, but Palo Alto, California. So in other words, home and identity work are not static or neat or clean. Rather, home, belonging, and identity often mimic a back and forth movement like a pendulum between home and not home, comfortability and not comfortability. I end with Entry into the Sacred Temple by Nirmala Natraj, as she describes a trip to Mahabalipuram, which is in South India, and this is what she writes. Before our trip, I pointed out Mahabalipuram on a map and told my mother, this is where I want to go. So this is actually her first trip to India. I remembered it from the huge picture books. For so long, Mahabalipuram had been an invisible string hitching me to history that wasn't and had never really been mine. The thick conjecture I had before coming is finally confirmed. Brown skin isn't enough. I am guilty as charged, a foreigner. I am both mournful and relieved. So Nirmala Nachraj talks about her first experience in India, where she feels this sense of home, her people, but then she also feels a sense of alienation, right? The anthology then illuminates the paradoxes of national belonging and not belonging, of diasporic South Asians in the United States and Canada, with selections written by individuals in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. The authors featured explore the meanings of culture and cultural identity. They investigate the intimate boundaries of their bodies and romantic partnerships, discuss the hegemonic constructions of race and ethnicity in North America and politics of brownness, and finally, question the notions of home and mobile diasporas. The selections themselves come from a wide range of literary genres, from fiction to social scientific inquiry to comedic script, to name a few. Welcome to the Peppermint Generation Not. I'm Roksana Badruddoja, author of Eyes of a Storm and editor of the anthology, and I'm elated to have been given the opportunity to share both of my books with you. Thank you.